My hands would not stop shaking as I sat in my car outside the coffee shop, staring through the windshield like I might see a different version of my life if I just looked long enough. For years of silence had ended inside that building, and the words I had held in my chest for so long were finally out. I had just walked away from my own family, not in anger this time, but with clarity, and somehow, that hurt even more. My name is Emma, and a few weeks before that moment, everything started with a simple email that felt heavier than anything I had ever opened. The subject line said we need to talk, and I let it sit unread for 2 days because I already knew it would pull me back into a past I had fought hard to escape. When I finally opened it, it was not an apology or a check-in. It was a request, almost a demand, disguised as concern. My mother wrote that my older brother, Daniel, had ruined his life. He had an affair, his wife left him, and he had been fired from his high-paying job. My father had recently gone through a heart procedure, and my mother said she was exhausted. Then came the part that made my chest tighten. She asked me to come home and help fix everything, as if I had always been the one responsible for holding them together. Reading those words dragged me straight back into memories I had buried under years of survival. Back to a time when my life looked completely different, when I was building something small but meaningful with my husband, Michael. We lived in a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where evenings felt peaceful and predictable. Michael was a police officer, dedicated and brave in a way that made me both proud and terrified. I worked as a nurse, juggling long shifts and student debt, but we were happy. We were expecting our first child, and everything in our world revolved around that tiny future we had not even met yet. We painted the spare room a soft yellow, laughing as we argued about where to put the crib. Michael spent an entire weekend putting together a second-hand crib, refusing to give up even when the instructions made no sense. He would rest his hand on my stomach and tell our baby that they were already so loved, and I believed him with everything I had. Then one night, everything shattered in a way I never saw coming. It was cold and raining, the kind of weather that makes the world feel distant and quiet. Michael kissed me goodbye before his shift, and I remember thinking I would see him in the morning like always. Around 10 that night, my phone rang, and something in my body knew before I even answered that my life was about to change forever. It was his captain, and his voice carried a weight that made it hard to breathe. He told me there had been an accident, that Michael had been hit by a drunk driver while responding to a call. I drove to the hospital in a haze, barely aware of the road in front of me. When I arrived, they took me to a small room, and I saw him lying there, still and pale, as if the world had simply drained out of him. I touched his hand and felt nothing but cold, and in that moment, something inside me broke completely. I wanted to tell him everything I had never said, every small regret, every piece of love I had taken for granted, but the words would not come. Instead, a sharp pain tore through my body, and I realized my grief had triggered something else. I was going into labor weeks too early. Between contractions and shock, I called my parents because I believed that no matter what had happened before, this was the moment they would show up for me. My mother answered after several rings, and I could hear noise in the background, announcements echoing through what sounded like an airport. I told her everything in broken sentences, that Michael was gone, that I was in labor, that I needed her. There was a pause that felt endless, and then she told me they were leaving on a trip with Daniel to celebrate his promotion. She said it had been planned for months and could not be canceled. Her voice was calm, almost casual, as if she were explaining a minor inconvenience instead of abandoning her daughter in the worst moment of her life. I did not argue or beg. Something inside me went quiet, and that silence said more than any words ever could. A nurse named Carol noticed something was wrong and stayed by my side through everything that followed. She held my hand as I gave birth to my son, Noah, without anyone from my family there. He was premature and had to stay in intensive care for nearly 2 weeks, and during that time, I was completely alone except for the kindness of strangers. The only message I received from my mother was a short text saying she hoped I was okay and that their trip was beautiful. I saved that message without fully understanding why, but deep down I knew it mattered. Michael's funeral came soon after, filled with people who respected and loved him, officers in uniform, friends, neighbors, even patients I had cared for. But my own family was missing, still enjoying their trip as if nothing had happened. That absence cut deeper than anything else, and when they finally tried to reach me, I did not respond. I spent the next 4 years rebuilding my life from nothing but grief and determination. I raised Noah, found strength in my work, and slowly created a support system that had nothing to do with blood. My elderly neighbor became like a grandmother to my son. Michael's captain checked in regularly, and the nurse who had stayed with me that night never truly left my life. Therapy helped me understand something I had never questioned before, that I had always been the one taking care of my family, even when I was the one who needed care. So when I sat across from them in that coffee shop years later, I was no longer the same person they had left behind. My mother looked polished, my father looked worn down, and Daniel looked like life had finally caught up with him. They asked why I had cut them off, as if the answer had not been obvious all along. I listened quietly, then reached into my bag and placed the evidence of their choices in front of them. I showed them the messages, the proof of everything I had sacrificed for them and everything they had refused to give me when it mattered most. I told them that pain does not disappear just because time passes, and that their choices had consequences. When Daniel apologized, I saw regret in his eyes, but it did not change anything inside me. Some damage runs too deep to be undone with words. I stood up and told them that I had nothing left to give people who only remembered me when they needed something. Then I walked out, leaving behind the version of myself that had always put them first. Sitting in my car afterward, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, but relief. For the first time, I had chosen myself. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from my mother filled with explanations but no real accountability. I read it once, folded it, and put it away because I no longer needed closure from people who never truly understood what they had done. That chapter of my life was already finished, whether they accepted it or not. That Christmas, Noah and I celebrated with the people who had stood by us when it mattered. There was laughter, warmth, and stories about Michael that made us smile instead of cry. When Noah asked why we did not see his grandparents, I told him something I had only recently learned myself. Family is not just about blood, it is about who shows up when you need them most. He thought about it for a moment, then smiled and said he liked the family we had. I hugged him tightly, knowing that I finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. It was not sacrifice without return or loyalty without support. It was presence, consistency, and care, and for the first time in my life, I had built something that truly felt like home.